The morning sky stretched endlessly above the Italian countryside. Dawn painted everything in soft blue hues. Captain Benjamin Davis, Jr. gripped the controls of his P-51 Mustang. The engine roared beneath him as he pulled into a sharp climb. 11 other aircraft followed in tight formation behind him. Their tail sections blazed crimson in the early light. Each plane bore those distinctive red markings. March 24, 1945 had arrived with crystal-clear visibility. Perfect flying weather for what lay ahead. Below them, heavy bombers moved through the air like floating fortresses. B-17s stretched across the horizon in perfect rows. Their destination was Berlin itself. The Nazi capital waited at the end of their flight path. These bombers carried more than explosive payloads. They carried the weight of Allied hopes, but something else traveled with them that morning. Doubt, suspicion, questions that had followed these pilots across an ocean. These weren't ordinary fighter escorts protecting the bombers. These were the Tuskegee Airmen, America's first black combat pilots. Men who faced two enemies every time they flew. The fascists ahead of them, the racism behind them. Every mission served dual purposes: fighting Hitler's war machine in the sky, battling prejudice on the ground. Their reputation had spread through Mediterranean airfields like wildfire. But the whispers weren't always kind. Could black men really master such complex machines? Did they possess the intelligence for aerial warfare? Could white bomber crews trust their lives to black pilots? These questions haunted every briefing room. They poisoned every conversation about fighter escorts. German intelligence had noticed these new American units, too. Reports filtered through Luftwaffe headquarters about red-tailed fighters. Some Nazi pilots actually laughed at the reports. Black aviators seemed impossible to their indoctrinated minds. Hitler's racial theories made no room for skilled black warriors. They would learn otherwise very soon. The story began years earlier in a different America. 1941 found the nation preparing for global war. Army Air Corps training programs expanded rapidly. Thousands of young men learned to fly fighters and bombers, but one group remained completely excluded. Black Americans faced total segregation in military aviation. This wasn't just tradition or prejudice speaking. Official military doctrine backed these exclusions. A 1925 War College study had declared black Americans incapable of combat flying. Military psychologists had developed tests supposedly proving racial inferiority. These weren't fringe theories held by extremists. They represented official government policy. Every senior military leader accepted these conclusions. Black exclusion from aviation seemed scientifically justified. But political pressure was building from unexpected directions. President Roosevelt needed black votes for re-election. Civil rights leaders applied relentless pressure. Walter White from the Adrinatidre CP lobbied constantly. Labor leader Philip Randolph organized massive protests. Judge William Hastie demanded military integration. The pressure reached a breaking point in January 1941. Howard University student Nancy Williams filed federal lawsuits. She demanded admission to pilot training programs. Roosevelt faced an impossible political situation. He needed black support without alienating white voters. His solution satisfied nobody completely. September 1940 brought an official announcement. The Army Air Corps would train black pilots, but this wouldn't mean integration at all. Segregation would be taken to its logical extreme. Black pilots would train separately from whites. They would serve in separate units, fight in separate squadrons, live in separate facilities. The military establishment viewed this as experimental. They expected complete failure from the program. Failure would prove black inferiority once and for all. Tuskegee, Alabama, became the chosen location. Deep in segregated Southern territory, Tuskegee Institute already had civilian flight programs. Charles Alfred Anderson led those existing programs. He was America's first black commercial pilot. If the experiment failed, it would fail quietly. Nobody expected the caliber of men who answered the call. July 19, 1941 brought the first aviation cadets. These weren't ordinary volunteers seeking adventure. They represented Black America's intellectual elite. College graduates with advanced degrees arrived daily. Howard University sent its brightest students. Fisk University contributed brilliant young minds. Tuskegee Institute provided its most promising candidates. These men had already proven their capabilities. They excelled in fields demanding absolute excellence. Captain Benjamin Davis, Jr. led this exceptional group. His father was America's first black general. Davis had survived 4 years at West Point. 4 years of complete social isolation. Not one white cadet spoke to him socially. Now, at 28, he was ready. Macross George Roberts joined him at Tuskegee. Lemuel Curtis brought his own unique skills. Each man carried the hopes of millions. Every mistake would be magnified and analyzed. Every success would be dismissed as exceptional. Tuskegee training was intentionally brutal. Military leaders wanted spectacular failures. Academic requirements exceeded white cadet standards. Physical demands were more punishing than normal. Flight training pushed beyond reasonable limits. Everything was designed for maximum washout rates. Chief Anderson understood what was really happening. Every black cadet mistake proved racial theories. Every success got dismissed as statistical anomaly. He pushed his students harder than anyone. They weren't just learning aviation skills. They were fighting for their entire race. The aircraft they received were cast-offs and leftovers. Primary trainers were worn-out Boeing Stearmans. Advanced training used tired P-40 Warhawks. These planes had seen much better days. Meanwhile, white units received the newest fighters. The message came through crystal clear. Black pilots would make do with scraps, whatever the military felt like sparing. But one unexpected ally emerged from high places. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt took personal interest. March 29, 1941, brought her unannounced visit. She shocked her Secret Service protection detail. She insisted on flying with Chief Anderson. The photographs made headlines around the world. America saw black aviation in positive light, for the very first time in history. But doubts persisted throughout military hierarchy. European combat reports suggested increasing sophistication. German pilots were highly experienced and well-trained. They flew the world's most advanced aircraft. How could black pilots compete against such opponents? Especially with inferior training aircraft? Limited resources made success seem impossible. March 7, 1942 brought graduation day finally. The first class received their silver wings. Benjamin Davis, Jr. was promoted to lieutenant colonel. He took command of the 99th Pursuit Squadron. America's first black military pilots were ready. The question remained whether they'd get chances to prove themselves in actual combat situations. The answer came faster than anyone expected. April 1943 brought overseas deployment orders. The 99th Pursuit Squadron shipped to North Africa. They joined the 12th Air Force immediately. The Mediterranean theater became their testing ground. They carried Black America's hopes with them, but they also carried white America's skepticism. Every single mission would be scrutinized carefully. Every enemy engagement would be analyzed thoroughly. evidence of competence or failure was sought. Their first base was desolate Moroccan airfield. White personnel greeted them with mixed reactions, curiosity mixed with open contempt in many. Segregation followed them into the combat zone. They lived in separate quarters completely. They ate in separate mess facilities. Recreation areas remained off-limits to them. Even fighting fascism couldn't end American racism. The American military maintained its racial ideology, right alongside Hitler's twisted racial theories. Their P-40 Warhawks were solid, but outclassed. German Messerschmitt 109s were faster and nimbler. Focke-Wulf 190s had superior performance characteristics. Enemy pilots had years of combat experience. The odds were stacked against success. Early missions were routine patrol duties. Bomber escort assignments came occasionally. But July 2, 1943 changed everything dramatically. A large German fighter formation appeared. The 99th encountered them over Mediterranean waters. Aerial battles swirled across the summer sky. Lieutenant Charles Hall scored the first kill. His Focke-Wulf 190 victim plummeted earthward. News flashed around the entire world. Black American pilots had engaged successfully. They had emerged victorious from combat. But one victory couldn't silence all critics. Some white commanders used early performance statistics. They argued for program termination immediately. Colonel William Maumier filed damaging reports. He suggested black pilots lacked necessary aggressiveness. Air-to-air combat required killer instincts. The reports recommended coastal patrol assignments only, far from main combat operations entirely. The recommendations sent shockwaves everywhere, through the War Department and black communities. Was this the end of everything? Would the Tuskegee experiment be declared failed after just a few months of combat? The future hung in the balance. Military leaders debated the squadron's fate. But Lieutenant Colonel Davis wouldn't surrender quietly. He requested opportunities to defend his men. Pentagon meetings were arranged for him. Davis presented detailed performance evidence carefully. He compared statistics to other fighter squadrons. The numbers told different stories entirely than Colonel Maumier's negative report had claimed. The 99th had performed as well, and sometimes better than white units. More importantly, reinforcements were coming soon. 3 additional black fighter squadrons existed. The 100th, 301st, and 302nd were ready. They had completed Tuskegee training successfully. Together with the 99th, they would form. The 332nd Fighter Group was created, the largest all-black flying unit in history. At this crucial point, they received the aircraft that would make them famous. July 1944 brought North American P-51 Mustangs, the most advanced fighters in American arsenal. These weren't hand-me-downs or second-rate aircraft. These were identical to elite white units. For the first time, they fought equally against their German adversaries in the sky. Equipping the 332nd with Mustangs was both practical and powerfully symbolic at once. The 15th Air Force needed every fighter for massive bombing raids against Germany. The Tuskegee Airmen had proven their abilities. Now they received proper tools for excellence to distinguish their aircraft from others. The 332nd painted their tails bright red. The red tails were officially born. But more than new aircraft transformed them. A new mission played to strengths. While white fighter units pursued individual victories, Colonel Davis gave different orders completely. Stay with the bombers at all costs. Your primary mission isn't scoring kills. It's bringing every bomber home safely. This philosophy proved tactically brilliant and historically significant for the future. German fighter tactics relied on luring. escort fighters away from bomber formations, leaving heavy bombers vulnerable to attack by refusing to take the bait. The Red Tails frustrated German pilots completely. They provided unparalleled protection to bombers. The results were immediately apparent everywhere. Bomber crews began specifically requesting them. Word spread through the 15th Air Force. The black pilots, with red-tailed Mustangs, provided the very best protection available for bomber crews facing German skies. The sight of red tails meant survival. March 24, 1945 arrived with perfect weather. The mission would cement their legend. Berlin was the target that morning. The stakes had never been higher. B-17 flying fortresses stretched across sky, like a deadly constellation of metal. Each bomber carried 10 tons of high explosive destruction for Berlin. This was the most heavily defended bombing mission of the entire war. The German capital had hundreds of guns. Anti-aircraft batteries ringed the city. Fighter squadrons protected the homeland desperately. The most advanced interceptors waited there, including revolutionary Messerschmitt 262 jet fighters. Colonel Davis had handpicked his pilots for this incredibly dangerous assignment ahead. Captain Lee Archer had become legendary. Among the top-scoring Tuskegee pilots overall, Lieutenant Roscoe Brown had unmatched skills. His aerial gunnery was absolutely perfect. Captain Charles McGee brought calm professionalism under fire that earned universal respect from every bomber crew he protected. As they approached German airspace carefully, radio communications crackled with tension constantly. German radar had detected the formation. Interceptor squadrons were scrambling from airfields. The Luftwaffe was no longer dominant, but it remained extremely dangerous still, especially when defending German homeland territory. German pilots fighting over home ground displayed desperate courage that made them formidable adversaries even in inferior numbers. The first trouble signs came from bomber gunners scanning the horizon constantly. Dark specks appeared in the distance, growing rapidly larger as fighters approached. But these weren't familiar aircraft silhouettes, not Messerschmitt 109s or Focke-Wulfs. These were sleek, swept-wing aircraft completely, moving faster than anything Americans had encountered. The Me-262 jets had finally arrived. German jet pilots approached with confidence, bordering on complete arrogance that morning. They had excellent reasons for self-assurance. The Me-262 was nearly 100 miles per hour faster than Mustangs. It could climb faster and dive deeper than any propeller-driven fighter aircraft. Its 30mm cannons could destroy bombers with single, well-placed burst of fire. More importantly, German pilots flying them were among Luftwaffe's most experienced veterans, men who had survived years of combat. They knew every trick of warfare. But German pilots had made crucial errors. They had studied intelligence reports carefully about American fighter tactics and expected escort fighters to abandon bomber formations, to pursue individual aerial victories instead. This was standard practice among most American fighter units completely, whose pilots were encouraged to seek and destroy enemy aircraft for kills. Germans planned to use this weakness, drawing escorts away from vulnerable bombers. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown spotted the first jet as it made its approach run toward the bomber formation ahead. The Me-262 came in fast and low. Its pilot clearly intended making single devastating pass through B-17s before using superior speed to escape. It was a tactic that worked countless times before against other Americans, but Brown and his fellow Red Tails had been drilled endlessly in doctrine. Colonel Davis's escort philosophy was clear. Stay with the bombers no matter what. Instead of pursuing the fleeing jet aircraft, Brown positioned his Mustang carefully between the German aircraft and the bombers. When the Me-262 pilot realized the American wasn't chasing him at all, he attempted a second attack run. This time Brown was completely ready. As the jet flashed past at tremendous speed through the formation, Brown led his target perfectly and sent a stream of bullets into the German aircraft's starboard engine. The jet began trailing smoke and fire as it disappeared into clouds below. What happened next stunned German pilots. Instead of celebrating his victory completely or pursuing other available targets nearby, Brown immediately returned to his position. In the bomber formation, exactly. The other red tails followed suit, maintaining their protective screen around B-17s, despite the presence of additional jets in the area around them. This was something Luftwaffe pilots had never encountered before in combat. American fighters that actually prioritized the mission over personal glory entirely. The German attack became increasingly desperate as more jets joined the battle. But every time a Me-262 attempted to approach the bomber's formation, it found itself confronted by red-tailed Mustangs that refused to be drawn away from their charges completely. German pilots found themselves in an impossible tactical situation entirely. They could use their superior speed to escape from individual engagements successfully, but they couldn't penetrate the screen around the B-17 formation at all. Lee Archer engaged the second jet of the day as it attempted a high-speed diving attack on bombers. The German pilot was skilled and extremely experienced in combat, using his aircraft's superior performance to attempt hit-and-run attacks. But Archer had studied jet characteristics and anticipated the attack vector perfectly. As the Me-262 dove toward bombers, Archer climbed to intercept it directly, positioning his Mustang in perfect position to engage the enemy aircraft. The brief dogfight that followed was a testament to pilot skill over technological superiority completely. The German jet had every advantage, except one crucial factor completely: Archer's determination to protect his bombers. When the Me-262 attempted to break away after its attack run, Archer was ready with deflection shot that sent 20 mm cannon shells into the jet's port wing. The German aircraft began steep, uncontrolled descent toward Earth below, leaving a trail of smoke and debris as it plummeted. By now, word was spreading throughout German fighter command completely. Intelligence reports had indicated Americans were using a new escort unit, but no one had expected this level of tactical discipline. German pilots who had grown accustomed to luring American fighters away from their bombers found themselves facing adversaries who simply refused to cooperate. The third and most dramatic engagement of the day involved Lieutenant Charles Dryden, whose Mustang developed engine trouble during combat. German pilots, recognizing a wounded adversary, converged on Dryden's aircraft immediately, like sharks sensing blood in water. But the other red tails immediately formed a protective formation around their squadron mate in trouble, escorting him safely away from combat, despite being outnumbered and under attack. This display of unit cohesion and mutual support was unlike anything German pilots had witnessed from Americans. Most Luftwaffe veterans had observed that American pilots tended to operate as individuals seeking personal victories. The sight of American fighters sacrificing potential kills to protect wounded comrades was both admirable and tactically brilliant. As the bomber formation approached, its target area over Berlin. The intensity of German defense reached its absolute peak that morning. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky, with deadly bursts of steel and explosive charges, while additional fighter squadrons rose to meet attackers. But the Red Tails maintained their protective formation completely, weaving through flak bursts and intercepting every German aircraft that attempted to reach the bombers safely. The psychological effect on German pilots was profound and lasting completely. These weren't the American fighters they had been taught to expect. These pilots displayed a level of discipline, unit cohesion, and awareness that rivaled the best Luftwaffe squadrons. More disturbing for German morale was the realization that these exceptional American pilots were black, a fact that challenged every racial assumption built into Nazi ideology. Reports began filtering back to German intelligence about the Black Devils, with the red-tailed aircraft completely. Luftwaffe pilots, who had previously expressed confidence about engaging Americans, began requesting reassignment when they learned they would be facing red tails. The propaganda value of this reversal was immense for Allied morale. The supposed master race was now afraid to engage black American pilots, but the true measure of success wasn't the fear they inspired, it was the gratitude they earned from bomber crews they protected. As B-17s completed their bombing runs over Berlin and turned for home, not a single aircraft had been lost to enemy fighters that day. The mission that was supposed to demonstrate German air superiority had instead showcased tactical brilliance of America's black aviators completely. The return flight was no less dangerous than the approach had been. German fighters continued to harass the formation, hoping to catch bombers when their escorts were low on fuel and ammunition supplies. But the Red Tails had planned for this contingency completely, rotating their formations to ensure continuous protection throughout the long flight back to Italy safely, even as individual Mustangs reached their fuel limits and turned for home. Fresh aircraft moved up to take their places in formation. By the time the mission was complete, the 332nd Fighter Group had achieved something unprecedented in the annals of aerial warfare. They had successfully escorted a major bombing raid to the most heavily defended target in Germany without losing a single bomber to enemy fighters. 3 German jets had been destroyed, including aircraft that represented the pinnacle of German aviation technology. Most importantly, they had done it while adhering to tactical doctrine that prioritized mission success over glory. Word of the March 24th mission spread rapidly through the 15th Air Force. Bomber commanders who had previously been skeptical of black fighter pilots now specifically requested red-tail escorts for their most dangerous missions. White aircrew members who had initially expressed doubts about being protected by black pilots now considered themselves fortunate to fly with escorts. The transformation in attitudes was remarkable and swift throughout the theater. Within weeks of the Berlin mission, bomber crews were painting informal tributes to the Red Tails on their aircraft. Letters home to families in America increasingly mentioned the skill and courage of the black fighter pilots for the first time in American military history. White servicemen were publicly praising the combat performance of black comrades. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the German pilots themselves. Intelligence intercepts revealed that Luftwaffe commanders were struggling to maintain morale among pilots assigned to intercept red-tail escorts in combat. The combination of tactical frustration and ideological confusion was proving devastating to German fighter effectiveness completely. Pilots who had been indoctrinated to believe in racial superiority were being consistently outfought by adversaries they had been taught to consider inferior. By the spring of 1945, the reputation of the Tuskegee Airmen had spread far beyond the confines of the Mediterranean theater entirely. News reports in America began featuring stories about the exceptional performance of the black fighter pilots. For the first time, mainstream American media was portraying black servicemen as heroes rather than curiosities or problems to be managed. The statistical record of Red Tails spoke for itself completely. Over 179 escort missions they had, lost only 27 bombers to fighters, far fewer than any other escort group in the 15th Air Force. They had shot down 112 enemy aircraft while losing only 66 of their own pilots to combat. More importantly, they had fundamentally changed the way bomber crews thought about fighter escort missions completely, proving that discipline and teamwork could overcome individual heroics entirely. As the war in Europe drew to a close, the Tuskegee Airmen found themselves facing a new challenge completely: the transition to peacetime service. The 477th Bombardment Group, composed of black airmen trained to fly B-25 Mitchell bombers, had completed training but never deployed overseas. The war against Japan ended before they could prove themselves in combat, leaving many feeling that their opportunity to serve had been denied by circumstance, rather than capability or racism. The individual stories of Tuskegee Airmen reflected the broader transformation taking place in American society. Captain Charles McGee, who had flown 136 combat missions, returned home to find that his military service had opened doors that had previously been closed to black Americans. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown, whose aerial victories had made him a hero in the black press, used his fame to advocate for civil rights. But the transition to civilian life wasn't easy for many veterans. Despite their distinguished service records, they faced the same racial discrimination that had existed before the war. Many found it difficult to obtain employment in aviation despite having proven their skills in the most demanding circumstances imaginable in combat. The airline industry remained closed to black pilots for decades after war. Many Tuskegee veterans were forced to find careers outside aviation entirely. The impact of the Tuskegee Airmen extended far beyond their individual experiences. Their success in combat had provided irrefutable evidence that black Americans could perform as well as whites in the most demanding military occupations. This evidence would prove crucial in post-war debates about military integration and civil rights generally. President Harry Truman, faced with mounting pressure to address racial inequality in the military, commissioned a study of black military performance during World War II. The report, based largely on combat records of units like the Tuskegee Airmen, concluded that segregation was militarily inefficient and morally indefensible completely. On July 26, 1948, Truman signed Executive Order 99981, officially integrating the United States military entirely. The order met with fierce resistance from many military leaders, particularly in the South, but the success of the Tuskegee Airmen had made the argument for integration impossible to refute with any credibility. How could the military justify excluding black Americans from equal participation when black pilots had proven themselves superior to their white counterparts in aerial combat situations. The legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen extended into the emerging civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Many veterans became leaders in struggle for equality using their military records to challenge segregation and discrimination. Their service had proven that Black Americans could excel in any field if given equal opportunity and training. Benjamin Davis, Jr., the first commander of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, became the first black general in United States Air Force history. His career trajectory from West Point, cadet to senior military leader, demonstrated the possibilities that opened when artificial barriers were removed completely. Other Tuskegee veterans followed similar paths, achieving success in fields that had previously been closed to Black Americans. But perhaps the most important legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen was proof. They provided that excellence has no color. In the skies over Europe, they had demonstrated that skill, courage, and determination are human qualities that transcend boundaries. Their red-tailed Mustangs had carried more than bombs and bullets into combat. They had carried the hopes and dreams of an entire people seeking equal recognition as Americans completely. Today, nearly 80 years after their first combat missions, the Tuskegee Airmen are remembered as pioneers who helped break down one of America's most enduring barriers to equality. Their story reminds us that progress often comes from individuals who refuse to accept limitations imposed by others, who prove through their actions that excellence speaks louder than prejudice entirely. The young men who reported to Tuskegee Institute in 1941 faced a military establishment that expected them to fail completely and spectacularly. Instead, they soared higher than anyone thought possible, earning respect through performance and changing the course of history. They proved that when given equal opportunity, talent, and determination, no boundaries whatsoever in any field. In the end, the Tuskegee Airmen didn't just win a war against fascism abroad completely. They won a victory against prejudice at home in America itself. Their red tails became symbols of possibility, proof that the content of character matters more than the color of skin. And in the skies over Germany, they showed the world that true superiority lies not in ideology or race, but in courage, skill, and determination to serve something greater than oneself.